our Region 11 presentation titled Unity and Community. During the session, we are going to talk about how we each leveraged our individual communities in order to innovate and create international programming during the pandemic. So now you can put some beautiful faces to our names that Alyssa mentioned just moments ago. You will meet each and every one of us during the presentation, but first we would like to get a sense of who is in the room. And so to do so, we're gonna start with a poll, as most of these presentations do. So if you can see the poll now, we would love it if you would participate. All right, it looks like we're getting a good mix of folks. About 10 more seconds. All right. Thank you. So yeah, this should lead to a really lively breakout session that we're going to do at the very end of this presentation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura to kick us off with setting the scene for the next hour.
Thanks, and hi everyone. I'm Laura, and I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background who has decided to make her NASA debut today. I'll be starting us off with some gap field and enrollment data before we share program models from Emerson, PSU, and Kaya. After that, we'll split into breakout rooms for you to share programs you've created to preserve enrollment and community, or to discuss challenges you're facing. So let's begin with a peek into the gap field, for those of you who are less familiar. Despite its name, a gap year isn't necessarily 12 months. In the gap field, we're typically referring to a planned break of anywhere between 3 and 12 months, taken between high school and college. Contrary to what my parents thought when I took a gap year, it's not a vacation. It is a planned time to experience something different, develop life skills, learn more about oneself, and to gain a better idea of how to move forward with purpose. Gap years can be formal with an organized program or sponsored by a university. They can be informal and more independent, for example, learning a new skill, volunteering, or traveling, or it could be a professional internship or work experience. So Kaya has been offering gap years for over a decade, and since the pandemic began, we've been involved in weekly calls hosted by the Gap Year Association, where gap counselors and providers are sharing trends, insights, and resources. So while we did see interest pick up in gap years in spring 2020, we wanted to also share data from our Gap network and friends at the Gap Year Association. The Gap Year Association shared that during the months of July and August 2020, their website traffic increased by more than 120% from the same period in 2019. GYA also shared that in a private anonymous survey on college gap year deferrals, 11 small private liberal arts colleges reported a pre-COVID deferral average of 17 students and current deferral average of 48 students. At 13 medium-sized private colleges and universities, they reported a pre-COVID deferral average of 34 students, and now that's up to 110. And at one large public and 2 large private universities, they reported a pre-COVID average of 37 students and currently at 118. So interest is definitely going up. Anecdotally, GAP professionals are having 3 to 4 times more gap year deferral conversations, more requests from high school college counselors for GAP speakers, and noted that colleges are increasingly calling gap years enrollment management tools. So we know that there was this increase in gap interest, and we know that an enrollment drop was speculated to happen this fall. What actually happened? You won't be surprised, enrollment went down. Data from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center shows that overall undergrad enrollment is down by 4% from last year. Community colleges were hit the hardest with an enrollment decline of 9.4%. Private nonprofit 4-year institutions experienced a drop of 2%, and public four-year institutions a drop of 1.4%. Private for-profit four-year institutions were the only ones who had an enrollment rise of 3%. Undergrad enrollment declined. The decline varied by race and ethnicity, as you can see from the slide. And overall international undergrad enrollment decreased by 13.6%. So it will come as no surprise to this crowd, the impacts of COVID on students' enrollment considerations. Finances, health, travel and visa restrictions, loss of a traditional college experience, and paying traditional costs for a virtual experience are some of the factors that we'll be addressing in the case studies today. So this brings us to the shared intervention goals that Emerson, Plymouth, and Kaya, and many of you, whether on the institution or provider side, many of the shared goals that we all have. Retaining enrollment, providing an accessible pathway forward for students, and preserving the internationalization mission on campus. So before we dig into our case studies, we have a couple of polls to hear from you. So let's see. Ian, can you share the...
Yeah, so the first poll is, can everyone see that? Sorry, I've actually never run a poll before.
You're doing great, you're doing great. So did you see a change in retention or students taking a leave of absence or other enrollment trend this year? So far, the percentage of no's is at 0%. So we're gonna take that. Let's see. We're up to yeses at about 79%, and I don't knows at 21%. It looks like nobody was not affected by this, which is what we expected. We can go to our next poll now.
Share those real quick, and then stop sharing, and then other poll.
Yes. So did your institution or organization develop special programming in response to COVID-19? It's looking like many of you did.
Yeah, that's going to be really good for our breakout session.
Yeah, so right now we're at least 3/4 of you implemented new programming as a result of COVID-19. The numbers are shifting a bit, but it looks like quite a few of you did. So that will be really interesting for you to share what you've done and any lessons learned in our breakout sessions. So I'll hand it over to Corey now, who's going to tell us about One World, One Emerson.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And again, so I'm Corey Blackmar, and I'm the Associate Director of Internationalization Initiatives at Emerson College. And coming off of what Laura had just described, I'm going to provide an example of what Emerson has done in the past few months to try and do things like retain enrollment and preserve our internationalization mission on campus, while also trying to strengthen that mission on campus as well. So just to start us off, I wanted to give just a brief background on Emerson College. So we are an independent private college focused mostly on communication and the arts in a liberal arts context. We have just under 5,000 students, with about 13% of our student population represented by international students from over 60 countries. We are a multi-campus with our main operations right in Boston, right in the theater district, right on Boston Common, but we also have brick and mortar facilities in Los Angeles, as well as a 14th century castle in Well, Netherlands, which is what you see pictured here. So that's just a little snapshot of us. All of our internationalization activities are housed within one main division called Internationalization and Global Engagement, which is supported by 4 subdivisions: International Student Affairs, Education Abroad and Domestic Programs, Internationalization Initiatives, and English Language Learning. So, like many of you, we, had a very sort of interesting year and interesting COVID experience, starting in March when we, like many colleges and universities in the U.S., had to shutter our in-person operations and close our campus to all students. And in that same vein, that meant a lot of our international students who were residing in Boston had to depart. We did have a few students who remained on campus, but many within the month of March departed to their home countries. Flash forward to June, when our spring semester was over and we were looking ahead to the fall. Emerson came out with its response program to this new normal that we're in right now, and we called it One Emerson Flex Learning. And so the goal of this program was to essentially be a hybrid program where students were living on campus in Boston, but taking sort of a hybrid courses with a lot of their courses bolstered by online content, but also with a number of courses across each department being offered exclusively online. And so in developing One Emerson Flex Learning, we knew pretty early on that it wasn't going to be a model that would serve all the needs of our international student population. And that was for a variety of reasons. So one of the major ones is compounded travel, flight, and visa restrictions, which I'm sure anybody who is on the call that works in international students and scholars field, it's just been, getting pummeled this whole summer and fall, just with different barriers being put up for international students physically coming to the US. So we had a lot of people who just couldn't make it back to Emerson for the fall semester. We surveyed students, and some of our students had concerns about actually coming back to the US, given the US's response to COVID-19 and just the situation of the pandemic here. We heard from students that they wanted to have some sort of in-person learning experience, that they experienced a shift abruptly to online learning in the spring, and not everyone enjoyed that, and not everyone wanted to continue that into the fall. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, there were some limitations to our online-only course offerings. Being a school that focuses largely on arts and things like film and acting and many hands-on types of things, there's only so far we can really go with offering all of our curriculum online. And so, some students found that they weren't able to hit all their requirements just by taking remote courses from their home country. So for these reasons, internationalization and global engagement at Emerson decided to develop a parallel strategy to One Emerson Flex Learning that was designed specifically for international students. And this is what we created. So we called our initiative One World, One Emerson. And essentially, this is a portfolio of 5 different on-site programs that were marketed specifically to international students in late June. So we intentionally focused on places that students could conceivably travel, either with the ability to obtain a student visa or travel visa-free. We also mostly focused on institutions or providers that Emerson already had some form of established relationship with. And that's either we already had a normative exchange agreement with some of the institutions. Some of them we used for faculty-led programming. Some of them we had agreements for 2+2 or 3+1 degree programs. Or in one case, we actually reached out cold turkey to an institution and said, hey, can we set up a visiting student program? And so we got those yeses from the five partners. And what we ended up developing was sort of a 2-track system for each partner. And one of those tracks, it was for continuing international students who would direct enroll into courses on the partner campus. But we also worked with each partner to develop a specialized curriculum just for our new incoming international students. So these are students who their only interaction with Emerson was with undergraduate admissions. They've never spent a semester on campus in Boston. And obviously had very specific course needs that we had to satisfy. We priced these options at a set lower rate than what our standard tuition and fees are to make it financially advantageous to students. And we arranged for them to pay their housing directly to their partner. Promotion of these programs took the form of an e-brochure that we emailed out to all the students, followed by about 2 weeks of webinars with each of these partners so students could make an informed decision. And finally, we collected all of our responses through an intent form so that we could move students then through each institution's enrollment process. As you can imagine, developing all these different options was a little bit like throwing spaghetti at the wall, and I'm sure you're wondering how it all shook out. So this is what happened. So we ended up enrolling 92 students across 3 of those 5 One World, One Emerson programs. The vast majority, 73 of those students, were actually Chinese nationals who opted to remain in China and study at our Chinese partner, United International College, with smaller pockets of students studying at the Paris College of Art and Franklin University, Switzerland. At all 3 sites, we have a mix of brand new first year, first semester Emerson students, as well as continuing students, taking a very varied mix of courses. And surprise, the EU travel ban, hit in late summer, and that effectively squashed our semester abroad program in the Netherlands that we usually do. And so what ended up happening there is we had to pivot really quickly, and we actually offered those students who by and large are US nationals the option to enroll at Franklin University, Switzerland as well. And we actually landed 7 of those students who shifted from our Netherlands program to our Switzerland program with about 2 to 3 weeks to turn that around. So that's where we landed. And once we knew who we had on these programs, our biggest priority then became trying to provide some form of consistent Emerson experience, particularly for the students who had never spent a semester in Boston before. So to that end, we developed and are still developing a multi-prong approach to preserve our institutional image abroad. And so this includes things like, for the Switzerland students, we actually brought Castile well to them by creating an online Castle course that they can take while they're at Franklin. We are lucky enough where we have staff that are physically located in Europe and or China, and we can actually capitalize upon doing in-person visits by those staff at these institutions, which is a nice physical presence for Emerson. We're always working on virtual engagement to get these students talking with each other and with other Emerson students around the world, but also developing opportunities for them to be exposed to Emerson faculty through different programs and through Emerson staff. We dedicated a specific peer ambassador who's based in Boston just for this group of students. And so he has been working really hard just to send out consistent communications to this group. He's actually mailing them postcards in the mail in the next couple of weeks. And so it's been great to just try and have them forge a relationship in the virtual space. And lastly, we're working with each of these partner institutions to develop collaborative events. We're coming up on International Education Week, and we'll be working with these institutions to do some special programming to highlight Emerson's global footprint. And so that's where we are with One World, One Emerson. And now I'll hand it over to Ian to talk about the Semester Bridge program.
Thank you, Corey, for sharing the One World, One Emerson program with us. As Corey mentioned, I'm going to discuss Plymouth State University's Semester Bridge program, which was trying to bridge the gap between incoming freshmen's decision to defer to a later semester and then them actually coming to PSU in the future. But before I dive into the Semester Bridge program, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Plymouth State University. We are a 4-year public university in Plymouth, New Hampshire, not Plymouth, Massachusetts. And our student population is about 6,000. And our international students come to campus largely for college sports, particularly hockey and skiing. And just to give you a little peek into how PSU is doing during the pandemic, we're all on campus. I'm in my office, and each week we have to get tested for COVID. It's mandatory. And we have to wear these different colored wristbands each week to signify that we have been tested. No one's really checking whether or not you're wearing the wristband. It's more of a solidarity movement on campus to show that we're all committed to combating the pandemic together. And then for the Semester Bridge program, we decided to partner with one of our affiliate program providers for study abroad, Kaya Responsible Travel. We decided to partner with Kaya for a few reasons. First and foremost, they have experience in gap year programming. And at the very beginning of the summer, when I was having preliminary talks with the director of admissions, he felt that he really wanted to target those incoming students that were likely going to defer. So we were going to develop some sort of gap year programming, and Kaya was equipped to do that. We also knew that Kaya was at the forefront of developing virtual programming for their students, and they were having a lot of success with their virtual internships over the summer. And lastly, we really like Kaya's mission to being a responsible travel organization. So we knew that whatever program we developed with Kaya, they would make sure that it would be equitable for all parties involved. And I'm going to briefly turn it over to Laura to talk about Kaya's mission in a little more in depth.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. So as Ian mentioned, we are a responsible travel organization, and our mission is to promote sustainable social, environmental, and economic development, which we do by partnering with the locally led community initiatives. So when the pandemic hit and we couldn't send students to intern or volunteer in person, we were pretty hesitant at first to offer virtual programs, unless we could ensure that they continued to meet our standards for responsible community engagement. And the push for virtual programs actually came from our community organizations that we work with, who always have creative solutions to the challenges at hand and who were eager to find a way to continue working towards their long-term sustainable goals. So I think that's important to mention.
Thank you, Laura. So moving on to the rationale behind the Semester Bridge program. As I said, having those talks with the director of admissions, we really wanted to focus on first-year students, incoming freshmen. For the reasons that Laura mentioned earlier during the setting the scene, we were anticipating to see an increase in deferrals, and we saw exactly that at PSU. So if we just compare this year's deferral rates to last year's, we saw a 180% increase in deferrals in first-year students. And why an international program to help this problem that we were trying to solve? As most of us know, travel interest remains high, even though a lot of schools are shuttering their doors for study abroad and international education. Just to give you one small statistic, if we look at Go Abroad, they saw a huge increase in their traffic over the summer. In just June alone, they had 1.1 million unique users to their site. And this far surpassed their entire 2019 unique visitor count. And then lastly, and selfishly, I saw this as an opportunity to recruit future study abroad students. Our data shows that students are in our system for about a year before they go abroad. So if I could give them this low impact international experience, it might excite them to pursue a full-on study abroad experience in the future. And now to talk to you about the details of the Semester Bridge program. But before I go into all the details, I would like to just preface this slide by telling you all that this program unfortunately didn't run this fall as planned, which I'll talk about a little more in the later slides, but I think it's important to give you that caveat before I dive into the specifics. So the Semester Bridge program was a 16-week program that we developed for incoming students. They would receive 3 PSU credits for completing this experience, and it would be offered at a very affordable price of $1,285. We chose Ecuador as a location for several reasons. One, Kaya was confident that their Ecuador community partners had the capacity to take on a virtual cohort of students. Kaya was also having a lot of success and a lot of good feedback from their students on their virtual internship programs in Ecuador. And lastly, Ecuador is a similar time zone to Plymouth, New Hampshire. So we really like that we would be able to offer synchronous learning for our students instead of having a lot of the virtual experience be asynchronous. The 3 main components of the program were the cultural workshops, the buddy chats, and the research project. The research project would be a group project that the students would work together on with a community partner in Ecuador. And then at the end of the semester, they would present the solutions or the outcomes of that project to the PSU campus. And then the other 2 components go together, the cultural workshops and the buddy chats. The cultural workshops would happen every other week on alternating weeks with the buddy chats. And the cultural workshops would be presented by the on-site director in Ecuador, and they would be topics to introduce students to the host country and culture. They would be things like food or healthcare or relationships, not just romantic, but like friends, coworkers, familiar relationships. And then the alternating weeks, they would have buddy chats where they would get paired up with a college age Ecuadorian student, and they would discuss the topics of that cultural workshop. These 2 components, the cultural workshops and the buddy chats, have been a huge part of Kai Responsible Travel's virtual programming across all of their programs. And then, so moving on to the global community slide. Instead of talking about outcomes as statistics, because I don't have any, unfortunately, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how I envision this program creating a global community in the spirit of unity and community. First and foremost, I wanted to break down the barriers across the offices on campus. So it was really great to work so closely with the director of admissions and the associate provost on building this program. I think that's really important to advancing international education on campus. And then secondly, by reaching incoming students that may be deferring, they probably aren't in Plymouth, New Hampshire. They're probably spread out across the US. So I want to build a program that they would be able to connect to campus through. And then lastly, and most importantly, creating that international connection with partnering with Kaya Responsible Travel and also with our community partners in Ecuador. And then I'm going to turn it over to Corey to start us off on our reflection.
Thanks, Ian. So in looking at these 2 different examples, at first glance, you might think, wow, these are 2 very different approaches. And just some ways in which you might think that are through program model. So PSU and Kaya, it's a virtual gap/bridge type program that's focused on just all of their incoming students. For Emerson, this was really an education abroad program, or what I like to call an education abroad solution to an international student scholar problem. And so it's, you know, in model, it's quite different. There's this virtual, ours is in person. Audience is definitely different as well. PSU and Kaya, it's focused on all of their new incoming students, which includes domestic students, versus us at Emerson. We had a very, very specific target population of our international students, because that's where we anticipated our enrollments to significantly drop because of the challenges of that particular population coming back into the United States. And then even the types of partners that we selected are quite different. So with PSU and Kaya as a sort of a third party organization, an affiliated organization with the university, that's one model to go around. But at Emerson, even though we did work with Kappa and specifically with our London program, ultimately the three options that enrolled were institutions that we had more of an exchange direct enrollment type of a relationship with. And so that actually ended up being quite different across the two examples. However, as different as they might appear, I think there's a lot of commonalities in some of the goals that we were talking about earlier in the presentation. So both programs have a very defined goal of preserving enrollment. And so whether that is, engaging students in an international virtual experience before they get to Plymouth State University, or in our case, it was about preserving enrollment for international students who maybe were going to take a leave of absence otherwise. Connecting students to campus, I think both programs have a very defined goal of having students feel connected to their school no matter where they are and what they're doing. And so, a student feels like they're part of an Emerson experience or feels like they're part of a Plymouth State experience, even on their program that's not physically located there. Seamless academic and financial approach. Definitely in both cases, we wanted to make things as advantageous for students as possible. PSU's program was quite affordable for students and offered academic credit that they could use. Same thing with Emerson. We reduced our standard tuition rate just for this group of students to do the One World, One Emerson programs, because we wanted finances to not be an additional barrier on top of everything else. And lastly, we both drew upon existing partnerships. So obviously PSU and Kaya have an existing relationship in the programs that they were providing already. With Emerson, we had different kinds of relationships with all of the global partners that we sought out. And so, and I think I speak for all three of us when I say that because we drew upon these existing partnerships, they were strengthened as a result of it, because we were able to come together and create something new in a very short amount of time, and be creative with one another. And so it's really just added more dynamism to these relationships. And so with that, we'll go into some lessons learned, and I'll have Ian start with his.
Yeah, so we're gonna present three main lessons that we learned, and the first one is mine, and it's to have a holistic approach. So this was the first program that I ever developed in international education, and from the very beginning, when I presented the idea, the director of admissions and the associate provost were the most excited about the program, which made them easy to work with. But what I wasn't good at was finding those offices on campus that were just as important to the program development and approval process, but were less excited or more skeptical about the program. So one office in particular that I failed to start in those early talks or talk to early on was the contracts and risk management department. So when we were nearing the approval stage of the program and we presented it to that office, they had a lot of questions. They had a lot of suggestions for modifications. And we tried to do all those things in a very short amount of time, but it just wasn't feasible. So I think in the future, I will definitely do a better job at having a holistic approach to program development on campus.
Great. So my lesson learned is a simple one that we all have probably heard before, and it's that less is more. So I think in our excitement to go out into the world and find different options for our various international student populations, we developed and spent a lot of time and effort developing, quite an array of things that students could choose from, and that we thought would be sort of equally or complement, sort of complementarily attractive to groups of students. Of course, it was the first time we were doing this, and so we weren't entirely sure what was going to appeal to whom and for what reasons. But we sort of shot far and developed more programs than maybe we probably should have. And even though we did have success overall, I think in retrospect, and having maybe more time next time, focusing efforts on maybe a few different strategies, few different opportunities for students that really have a bigger impact and maybe serve a greater number of students would probably be more effective for a wider array of students in the long run.
And I'll be talking about soliciting feedback from students when you can. Ian was very kind to share that some of the cultural pieces to our virtual programs are going really well, and they are, but our initial design back in the spring, it totally missed the mark. And we shared it with students. We thought it was grand. We shared it with students and they're like, no, this isn't what we want. Because they were craving social connections and they were already getting the Zoom fatigue. And so what's working well is really because we did bring students into the process. Otherwise, it would have been trash. And then it's also worth mentioning that for PSU, we were pushing the clock to get the program approved in time to recruit. And we didn't get to that stage, but one of the potential challenges that we discussed was how do we solicit feedback from students? How do we gauge their student interest and present them with this alternative option without discouraging them from actually enrolling in PSU? So that's perhaps one of the things that your institution is encountering as well. And I wish I could say that we had an answer for that. But I think that's one of the considerations when we're thinking about how to engage students and bring them into the conversation about gap or bridge programs.
So as we gaze into the very cloudy crystal ball of the future, and we start to wonder, is this thing even working? We wanted to just give you a snapshot of where we are right now as we look to spring 2021 and beyond. So for Emerson, we are gauging interest from students in either renewing these 3 partner programs that we ran in the fall program in the fall semester, again for spring. But we're also trying to learn from our lessons and actually explore other strategies as well. One of them might potentially being using more of our own Emerson campuses abroad for purposes of receiving these types of students. But, I think, again, looking into sort of the medium-term future, again, I think, forging these different kinds of relationships with these institutions has long-term benefits. And so at least some of these institutions, it's caused us to think about, can we have more long-standing normative exchange relationships with a lot of these institutions that we don't necessarily have right now? And can those be really robust in the future? So it's been good food for thought.
Yeah, and as Corey mentioned, the cloudy crystal ball, we talked about every time we met, this slide changed. We changed what was on here. So it's likely going to change in the future as well. But throughout the semester, we've continued the talks about the semester bridge program, and we landed on probably running it next fall instead of the spring, since it is targeting incoming students. But out of those talks, we thought it might be interesting to offer a condensed version over the winter, because most of our students have an extended winter break this winter. They have almost 2 months off or more, and PSU already has a J term. So we're thinking about how do we condense that down into like 4 or 5 weeks and present it as a J term program.
All right, and now I think it's time for your reflection.
Yes.
And so Laura's gonna jump us into that.
lead us into this one. So we're going to be splitting into breakout rooms for you to share what you're doing. We have 2 discussion questions. If you implemented programming focused around preserving enrollment and/or community, what strategies are you using to create a global community of learners? And if you did not implement programming but would like to, how would you go about moving that forward at your institution? What are the challenges and/or opportunities for your international education office? So I'm going to be dropping into the chat box a Google Doc where we can collectively take notes. So when you're assigned to your breakout room, pay attention to your group number and then find the corresponding text box in the Google Doc. That's where you're going to take your notes. So it's a good idea to choose a scribe from your group who can be in charge of taking those notes. And then we encourage you after this session to go back and see what other folks are doing if they don't get a chance to share out during the breakout session. We did include an optional space if you would like to share your name and institution in case, I think the best part about NAFSA sessions is that we all get to collaborate and talk about what's happening at our institutions or organizations. So if you would like to include that there, in case anybody has questions about what you're doing, feel free to include it, but totally optional. And then we'll gather back in about 10 minutes to do a share back. So please choose a reporter for that. And I think Alyssa is going to be breaking us out into groups. So remember to click on that Google Doc before you go anywhere. And I see the numbers are doing. Yeah, we're ready to go.
There you go. It just takes a minute for folks to,
Okay.
for NAFSA, for Zoom to get everybody in their room, but slowly happening. Few stragglers who maybe are on their phone and can't get into a breakout room. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to either write them in the chat or unmute yourself. We can try to help. There's 2 people on who may or may not be frozen. Jim, are you going to a breakout? Were you invited to a breakout? Jim, Paul, and Eduardo. Oh, I see Jim getting on the phone. I think you're muted. Oh, okay. Corey and Laura, there's Jim, do you want to type in the chat maybe? Can't hear you. I'm sort of mouth reading our lips. You're sorry, you're on the phone. The movie. 3 words. Laura and Corey, there are 3 breakout rooms, and I think Ian's in one of them. So if you guys want to go to the other 2, I think because a lot of people left before the breakout. So if you wanted to each be in one, you could probably still do that.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I think Jim let himself go.
Oh.
I don't know what's happening with that. Okay, can you get in the breakout still, or?
Yes, so if we click up breakout rooms.
Yeah, so up to you. I think Ian is in the second one. So 1 and 3 are open.
And will you call us? Yeah, we've been a couple of minutes, so if we want to come back around 3:53.
Okay. I'll message you at 3:53 for a 60-second countdown.
Okay.
I'm just trying to join my breakout room.
I just moved you to breakout 1.
Oh, do I have to, or should I stop? I should probably stop sharing.
Yeah, why don't you stop sharing? Anyways, actually, I should have stopped the recording. Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. Just to do a quick share back and wrap up, We would love to hear from the different groups what types of programs that folks are implementing around these topics. So reporters, feel free to just shout it out.
We launched a peer mentor program at Clark University for our international students.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Is anyone else brave enough to share what they've been up to? Or challenges that you'd like to share, opportunities you'd like to share?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So we did some programming very similar to what you've done with Kaya, and so working with our local partners in Peru and creating programming that is on an American schedule a little bit, because normally we work with their schedule when we send the students to their institution. So being able to create a J term, something that they don't typically do because that's their like summer break, and then also during the spring term they typically start in March. So we're getting them to move things forward because we're collaborating with them to offer the online programming, and so the university's handling the academic side, offering a handful of courses, and then our local team in Peru is doing the cultural modules and supporting in the cultural enrichment, similar to I think what you guys are offering in that sense. So it's great to see that that just working with partnerships and institutions abroad and coming together and partner institution and provider collaboration is alive and well.
Yes, thanks, Joe. It's been wonderful to maintain that community connection for sure. Any others who would like to share?
I can share. It's Katie at Hampshire. We have a semester program in Cuba, which we had to cancel for the spring semester. So we decided to create an online course taught by our faculty who would normally go down there that will be online for January. So it's a January term course, and it's going to be taught in conjunction with our partners down in Cuba.
Great, thanks for sharing, Katie.
I'll just go very briefly. Hi, everyone. I'm Ilsa from Boston University Study Abroad. And I just have to say that we had a lot of dreams of providing different programs and pivoting, but as many of you who work at institutions know, it's not as easy to be nimble, quite like different providers. So I just want to shout out a big congratulations to all of you who have been able to implement things successfully. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, I'll echo that shout out to everyone who's really scrambled to pivot and make these happen as best they can.
I'll just throw it out there. There was a lot of talk in group one just about maintaining the really just for your students who are physically on campus, still maintaining, some type of programming for them. It's so difficult, in the current conditions to have people gather and do fun things. But what I was hearing from some of the people on the call, and I know that Emerson's doing this and a lot of other institutions are as well, is just, doing things like socially distanced pumpkin carving or going on, small group walks around your campus, around your town. And I think that's really important too, because, you can't, no matter how many students are maybe not physically on your campus, you can't really ignore the small group that is there, because they're a very important constituent group that's, that physically made it onto campus, probably through some efforts, if they're international students. And so giving them some extra love just with programming, that was kind of what came out of our group.
Thanks, Corey. And thank you everybody for attending. We have our contact information here. If you have any follow-up questions, on the next slide, we have some resources if you, of things that we've referenced during the presentation. So thanks so much. We hope this was informative, and it was good to collaborate with others who are going through the same thing. So we wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
We have a question about sharing the Google Doc. Yes, you can share the Google Doc with your offices.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Yes, thanks, Alyssa, for
I definitely
back.
third Elsa in the fact that this stuff is not easy
Mm-hmm.
to actually get off the ground. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I experienced that firsthand with my program.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we don't move that fast in higher ed sometimes.
Yes, I've had a semester program I'm working on now. We're building it as we're trying to fly it, but so far so good. But the
The
things,
expression of the year.
yes, the things that we don't, think of until we're in the middle of it. But it's a good brain exercise.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, did you have any lingering questions?
No, I'm gonna pop out. I was just taking some notes and just making sure
I was
that
like, because you're welcome to chat with us, really.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure I owe you an email. At
I'll
least.
cut the
Hang out.
recording so you guys aren't having to chop up an hour and a half long video, and you're trying to